Have you ever watched someone get erased while they're still standing right there? Not with a slap, not with a scream, just one sideways glance and suddenly they no longer exist. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, this story might feel a little too familiar. The ballroom was glowing crystal chandeliers, champagne bubbling, and pride polished into every corner. It was the Charles Memorial Dinner. The night they all dressed like legacy was a crown to be claimed. At the front table, every seat was taken by someone carrying the family name. Every seat, except one, a chair left empty, reserved, waiting. And then Maria walked in. Black uniform, clean shoes, one hand holding a silver tray. But she wasn't serving. She was looking at the chair. She didn't speak. She didn't move closer. She just stood there. From across the room, a woman in a red satin dress turned. Her voice, smooth but sharp, a few chuckles followed. One man lowered his glass. Another leaned in to whisper. In less than 5 seconds, the message was clear. She doesn't belong here. But what they didn't know is that she had more claim to that room than most of them ever would. Because this isn't a story about a maid getting kicked out of a fancy dinner. It's about a promise made 12 years ago to protect a child the world was never supposed to know. And by the end of this video, you'll understand that empty chair wasn't waiting for a Charles Onesimus. It was waiting for the person they'd all tried to forget. And the woman they all just dismissed was the only one who remembered. Before we go on, notice one thing. Maria's uniform wasn't like the others. There was stitching on the collar, and in her pocket, a folded cloth with a symbol no one had seen in years, except one man sitting at the back of the room, whose hand suddenly froze on his wine glass. Some chairs don't need a nameplate. They just need someone willing to stand beside them until others finally see who it was always meant for. Have you ever been asked to leave a place you helped build? Then stay. This story is for you. 12 years earlier, on a night colder than it should have been for spring, the back entrance to the Charles estate creaked open. Maria stood there, apron still on from her evening shift, but her hands were bare waiting. Mr. Charles himself stepped out from the shadows. No chauffeur, ready to return a warning on no coat, just him in a bundle wrapped in gray wool. He didn't say a word at first. He only looked at her not like an employer, not like a man above his staff, but like someone desperate. Finally, he whispered. His name isn't written anywhere yet. I didn't know what to do. Maria's eyes dropped to the baby. He couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Still red in the cheeks, still curling his fingers like he hadn't gotten used to the world yet. She didn't ask where the child came from. She didn't ask whose he was. She already knew. And she knew what kind of storm would tear through the mansion if anyone inside saw what Mr. Charles was holding. He stepped closer. No one can know. Not my wife. Not the family. Not yet. His voice cracked at the edges like a man trying to stay powerful while drowning. Maria took the baby in both arms. She felt his weight light, but alive. And for a moment, the cold didn't matter. Nothing else did. Mr. Charles reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope. There's enough in here to cover everything. For now, but it wasn't the money Maria looked at. It was the way his hand trembled as he placed it into hers. He trusted her. With his secret, with his son, she looked up. What should I call him? Charles paused, shook his head. That's for you to decide. The door closed behind her. Inside the mansion, crystal, wine, inheritance. But out here in her arms was a child no one would claim. Except her. The house she lived in wasn't hers. The child she loved wasn't hers. But every morning at 6:45, the toast was cut into triangles just the way he liked it. Nathan, 7 years old, sat at the small kitchen table of Maria's modest apartment, feet swinging, curls messy from sleep, eyes fixed on the jam jar like it held treasure. Maria poured tea for herself, milk for him. On the wall behind them, a faded photo of a church in El Paso. No family pictures. No frames with baby hands or proud birthdays. Just the quiet rhythm of a life that asked no questions. But that morning was different. Nathan was holding a school form, the kind all parents have to sign. He tapped it twice, looked up. Mama, what do I put for father's name? Maria froze, spoon midair. The milk spilled slightly over the edge of his cup. She sat down, folded the form, held it in both hands as if weighing its truth. You put nothing, she said softly. You leave it blank. Nathan nodded. Not upset. Not curious. Just quiet. But later, when he picked up his backpack, he asked without looking, did he not want me? Maria's throat tightened. She knelt to fix his collar, then held his face in her hands. You are wanted, Nathan. More than you'll ever know. He smiled, a child's smile. Trusting, easy, and walked out the door. Only after he left did Maria reach into the drawer under the stove. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a photo of Nathan at 6 months in Mr. Charles's arms. She looked at it, touched the corner, then closed the drawer again. The world outside would never know who he was. But inside that small kitchen, over toast and tea, he was hers. The last time Maria saw Charles alive, he was not in a suit. Not behind a desk. Just a man in a hospital bed, his body failing faster than his pride would admit. The nurse stepped out. The room fell silent. Maria stood at the doorway, hesitant, hands folded like she was still in uniform. Charles looked up pale, eyes sunken, voice rough as gravel. You came, he said, almost surprised. Maria nodded. You asked? For a few seconds, they just looked at each other. Years of secrets passed between them without a word. Then he reached to the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the blanket between them. This is everything. The will, the documents, and a recording. I need you to give it to him when the time is right. Maria didn't move. He still doesn't know. Charles shook his head. He will, but it has to come from you. Not lawyers, not headlines. It will you force it one. His hand trembled. Maria reached forward, steadied it gently. I couldn't protect him the way I wanted to, Charles said, eyes wet now. But you did. Better than I ever could. There was a long pause. Then Charles gave her something else, a small box. Inside a necklace, Seriribiurm, Serminmarnanta, a silver chain with a pendant. It was a locket. Inside a picture of a woman young, warm, radiant. Nathan's mother. He should have this, Charles whispered. He should know where he comes from, even if no one else ever does. Maria took both items, the envelope and the necklace, and placed them carefully in her bag. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Just gave a soft nod, then turned to leave. Behind her, Charles whispered one last thing, but she never told anyone what it was. The day Nathan left for boarding school, the sky was gray, not stormy, not clear. Just undecided. Maria stood by the curb with her coat buttoned up, holding a brown suitcase that had seen better days. Nathan, now 10, bounced on his heels, nervous but excited. New backpack, new shoes, new chapter. He didn't know it yet, but Maria had chosen this school not just for the academics. It was 3 states away, far enough to keep him safe from whispers, from family secrets waiting to spill. The school bus pulled up, engine humming like a long goodbye. Nathan turned to her, smiled wide. I'm going to make you proud. Maria reached out, brushing his collar. You already have. He hugged her quick, the kind of hug a boy gives when he's too excited to hold still. Then climbed aboard. The door closed. The bus pulled away. And just like that, she was alone on the sidewalk. She didn't cry, not right away. She reached into her coat and touched the envelope, the one Charles gave her, still sealed. And the small box with the necklace inside? She'd kept them hidden for months. Not even Nathan knew they existed. Back in her apartment, she placed both in a shoebox under the bed next to the only photo she kept of the 3 of them together. Charles holding Nathan. Maria off to the side, caught mid-laugh, like she wasn't supposed to be in the frame. She stared at that photo for a long time, then folded it back, placed it on top of the envelope, and closed the lid. For now, the truth stayed buried beneath the bed, beneath the past, beneath the silence she wore like armor. But somewhere deep inside, she knew one day that box would have to be opened. And if you've ever kept something buried, not because it was shameful, but because the world wasn't ready, then leave a comment, share your quiet strength, and subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where every silence has a story. The ballroom looked like it was built to impress ghosts. Gilded edges, spotless silverware, and a chandelier so large it had its own support beam. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance. The Charles Memorial Legacy Dinner. Each seat at the main table was occupied by someone who carried the last name or married into it. Everyone dressed like they were about to be photographed by history. And every single one of them thought tonight might be the night. At the center of the table, the empty chair. Still unclaimed. Still waiting. The first toast came from Martin, Charles's eldest son. Gray suit, Rolex, Gordmakadiabjörm, smile too polished. To my father, he said, raising his glass, who built not just a business, but a name we'll carry forward. One of us, especially. He paused just long enough for the meaning to sting. Polite laughter followed. Some lifted eyebrows. No one clapped. Then came Lila, Charles's second daughter. Softer voice. Wine still untouched. She stood slowly. Dad always said legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who. She didn't name names, but her eyes landed on the empty chair. Tension thickened with each course. Lobster basket. Ikinisher, chwashimin. Filet moignon, filet mignon. Silence between bites. The kind of silence where everyone's thinking the same thing. Is it me? Did he choose me? How could he not? At the far end of the room, Maria walked quietly between tables, refilling water glasses. She didn't look toward the main table. She didn't have to. She knew what they were doing, sizing each other up like auction items. Just before dessert, the family lawyer entered. Slight man, navy suit, leather folder in hand. He stood beside the empty chair. Tension peaked. As you all know, he began, Mr. Charles left very clear instructions regarding tonight's gathering. Every fork paused midair. He designated someone to speak on his behalf, someone who has held his final wishes. The room leaned in, eyes darted, fingers twitched. That person will address you shortly. He stepped back. Did not say whom. Did not sit down. Just placed the leather folder on the table and waited. The moment the last spoon touched the empty dessert plate, the lawyer cleared his throat, not loud, not demanding, just enough to shift the air in the room. All eyes turned toward him, expecting a name, a cue, perhaps a final toast that would reveal the chosen heir. But instead, he reached down and picked up the leather folder that had sat untouched beside the empty chair. With careful precision, he opened it, glanced briefly at a page, then looked up and said just one sentence. She's ready. For a second, no one moved. People exchanged glances. Someone muttered under their breath. Then, from the far end of the room, the side reserved for staff, Maria stepped forward. No podium, no microphone. Just her quiet footsteps echoing in the thick carpeted silence. The lawyer nodded as she passed him, and slowly, every head in the room turned. Confusion spread like a wave. A few whispered. One woman scoffed audibly. A man in the third seat from the left leaned back and crossed his arms, already preparing to dismiss whatever this was. Maria stopped a few feet from the main table. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't rushing. She looked directly at the empty chair and took a quiet breath, as if gathering the weight of 12 silent years into her lungs. Then someone said it. Not loud, but sharp enough to pierce the moment. This is ridiculous. She's just the maid. It came from the woman in red satin again, the same one who questioned Maria's presence near the table earlier. A few others nodded, unsure whether to be outraged or entertained. But Maria didn't flinch. She slowly unfolded a paper from her apron pocket and laid it gently on the table. A familiar signature was visible even from a few seats away. This is the last thing Mr. Charles ever wrote, she said, her voice steady, low, but deliberate. And he asked me to read it to all of you, because none of you were there at the end. Oh, I was. And just like that, the room that had laughed at her presence fell completely silent. Maria didn't read from the letter right away. She looked around the room. not for permission, but to be sure they were truly listening. She had spent decades passing silently behind their chairs, blending into the wallpaper of their lives. But tonight, she stood still and spoke like the walls had finally decided to speak back. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake, but there was weight in every word as she said, 12 years ago, Mr. Charles returned from a business trip with something no one expected. Not a contract, not a new acquisition, a child. The air changed. Several faces tensed, some confused, some beginning to realize where this was going. Maria continued, he couldn't raise that child here. He couldn't tell his family. So he made a promise to someone who had no name on the door, no title on the will, someone he trusted. She touched her own chest briefly. He asked me to take him in, to raise him, to protect him. A glass clinked in the background. Accidental, but no one moved to hush it. The room felt frozen, as if afraid to break whatever spell she'd cast. She spoke again, quieter this time. The boy grew up not knowing who he truly was. I told him he was wanted, loved, but not why. Not yet. I waited for the right time. Mr. Charles asked me to wait. He said when the family gathered again, when the masks were off, I would know. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, a small one, folded at the corners, faded with years. She laid it on the table beside the letter. Ooh, this is him, Nathan. The photo showed a toddler in someone's arms, face lit with a laugh, curls unmistakable. Some of you have seen this child before and didn't know it, she said. Some of you looked him in the eye, not realizing whose eyes you were looking into. The silence was no longer polite. It was heavy, electric, tight with unspoken things. He's not here to take anything, Maria added, but he deserves to be known. Because legacy isn't just bloodlines and bank accounts. It's truth. And truth has waited long enough. Maria didn't pause for reactions. She knew what disbelief looked like. She'd seen it in this very room, year after year, disguised as politeness. So she reached into her worn leather bag and carefully pulled out a second envelope, thicker than the first. She placed it on the table without a word, letting the weight of it speak before she did. Her voice came slower now, not from hesitation, but from the gravity of what was inside. These are copies of his will, notarized, with Nathan's name listed not as a distant beneficiary, not as a quiet donation, as his son, the legal heir. She let that sentence settle, not forcing it, not defending it, just allowing the truth to breathe. A few seats down, someone muttered, "This is a setup," but no one echoed it. Then Maria pulled out a small black recorder, not digital, not new, the kind that fits in your palm and keeps secrets for years. She pressed play. And then, for the first time that evening, Charles's voice filled the room. Faint, worn by illness, but unmistakably him. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get to do this in person. I want you to know, Nathan is my son. I made mistakes plenty, but Maria never did. She gave that boy everything I couldn't. And now, it's time he takes his name. The recording clicked off. No music, no flourish. Just that, for a moment, no one spoke. The chandelier above them didn't move, and yet it felt like the entire room had tilted. Maria reached into her bag one final time and gently placed a necklace on the table. A thin silver chain, worn with time, and at its center, a small locket. She opened it toward them. Inside was a photo, a woman with soft eyes. The kind of face you don't forget. This belonged to his mother, Maria said quietly. Mr. Charles kept it with him until the day he died. It never left his bedside. She looked around one more time, her eyes softer now. He wasn't asking you to approve. He was asking you to know. And with that, she stepped back, hands empty. Truth delivered. Nothing more to say, just the sound of everything they thought they knew, falling apart. Before anyone could gather their thoughts or form a protest, the doors at the far end of the ballroom creaked open. Not the side doors used by staff, not the main entrance where guests arrived earlier that evening, but the old double doors rarely touched since Charles's last birthday. the ones that always seemed to stay shut no matter the occasion. Every head turned. Some instinctively sat up straighter. Others leaned forward, and a few narrowed their eyes as if the room itself had just changed temperature. A young man stepped through, tall, composed, dressed in a plain black suit with no designer label visible, no family crest pinned to his chest. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He simply walked forward like someone who already knew every step he took might not be welcome, but mattered anyway. Maria didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this exact moment longer than anyone would understand. The young man stopped a few feet from the table, his hands clasped calmly in front of him, and for a second, just one, you could almost hear the room inhale. The resemblance was not immediate, not loud, but it was there, the shape of his jaw, the quiet determination in his eyes, the way he scanned the room without rushing, without shrinking. He didn't need to be introduced. He didn't need to explain himself. He was not there to prove anything. But still, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single object, a necklace. Not just any necklace, but the same one Maria had placed on the table moments earlier. Except this one was a match. Identical chain, same type of silver, same locket, only this one had never left his neck. He held it out, gently opened it, and showed what was inside the other half of a photograph. The same woman, same soft expression, same past, except this side of the image had a hand reaching into the frame, touching her shoulder. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but clear. He never gave me his name, he said, but he gave me this. And now, I'm here to return it. And with that, he placed the necklace next to the documents and the recording, not as a challenge, but as closure. The moment the second necklace touched the table, something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not with gasps or applause, but with the quiet unraveling of doubt, like a thread pulled from a tapestry that no one expected to come loose. Eyes moved between the two lockets. Nearly identical but aged in opposite ways, one worn smooth from years in a man's pocket, the other shaped by the warmth of a child who never let it go. They didn't sparkle. They weren't meant to them. They were simple, silver, and undeniable. The locket Maria had placed held the mother's face, young, still, eternal. The one the young man carried held the missing piece, the same face, now beside Charles, not staged, not formal, but real, the kind of photo people don't expect to be seen, the kind they keep because it means something. Nathan, though no one had said his name yet, everyone knew it now, stood without flinching, the chain still loose in his fingers, the room still watching. He didn't explain the picture, didn't justify its existence, because truth doesn't ask for permission. He simply set it beside the folded photo Maria had shown, the letter, the voice recording, as if placing a final stone on a path that had been built in secret for over a decade. One of the cousins, a man who had earlier raised a toast about legacy and inheritance, leaned forward as if to speak, then sat back down, jaw clenched, unable to form the words. Another guest wiped the corner of her eye, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something like shame. And through it all, Nathan said nothing more. He stood in front of them, not with entitlement or demand, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had waited his entire life to be seen and chose this moment not to take, but to return. The necklace wasn't proof. It was memory made visible. It was the echo of a promise that Charles had carried until his last breath, and now passed on without saying a word. And when Nathan stepped back from the table, he did so not as an outsider walking in, but as a son stepping into the silence left behind. The lawyer didn't stand immediately. For a long moment, he looked at the table, at the two necklaces, the letter, the photo, the recorder, like pieces of a puzzle no one had wanted to solve until now. Then he rose, slow and composed, opened the folder he had brought, and removed a single sheet of paper, slightly yellowed, thick with the weight of finality. His voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. It carried the kind of authority that comes not from volume, but from certainty. I am now authorized to read the final amendment to the will of Charles Edmund Langston, dated 6 weeks before his passing. No one moved. No one breathed. The room had become a museum of suspended judgment. I, Charles Edmund Langston, the lawyer read, being of sound mind and full memory, leave all rights, holdings, and assets in trust to my son Nathaniel James Langston. He paused. Let the name settle. Let it burn into the silence. The Shiny, raised with care and dignity by Maria Elena Reyes, to whom I also leave a lifetime stipend in full ownership of the Westwood property. A sharp breath was heard from somewhere near the end of the table, but no one dared interrupt. To my children by marriage and blood, I leave this letter, and my hope that they will learn to see legacy not as entitlement, but as responsibility. To Nathan, I leave not just what I've earned, but what I never had the courage to claim publicly, the truth. The lawyer looked up. Eyes darted away. No one applauded. No one protested. There were no speeches, no objections, no final arguments. Just the sound of one man's voice echoing through his absence. In the aftermath of truth landing, where denial used to sit. Maria didn't smile. Nathan didn't bow. The lawyer quietly folded the document, placed it back in the folder, and sat down. And the chandelier above, untouched, reflected back a room no longer certain of who it had gathered to honor or who had truly been missing all along. Nathan didn't step forward. He didn't need to. The words had already been said, the truth already laid bare. But still, something remained in the air, something unfinished. Not in the documents, not in the recording, but in the space between him and the people who had spent a lifetime pretending he didn't exist. He looked at each face around the table, one by one, not with anger, not with pride, but with a steady calm that unsettled more than shouting ever could. Some couldn't meet his eyes. Others tried to hold their ground, jaws clenched, fingers twitching, eyes darting toward the exit as if this moment might pass if they just refused to accept it. He let the silence stretch, not to punish them, but because sometimes silence tells a story better than words, especially when it's been earned. And then he turned to Maria, standing off to the side where she had stood for years. Never asked to sit, never asked to speak, always present, always invisible. He didn't call her by name. He didn't explain their bond. He just said, with quiet conviction, I was raised by the one person in this room who never asked for anything, not credit, not inheritance, not applause. His voice didn't crack, but something inside the room did. She taught me what loyalty sounds like when no one's listening, what love looks like when no one sees it, what strength feels like when it never gets thanked. The air shifted. The shame was no longer his to carry. It returned to where it belonged. He glanced once more at the empty chair beside the lawyer, the seat they had all hoped would go to them, and then looked back at Maria. If legacy is about who you become, then she's the reason I'm standing here at all. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. He didn't expect applause. He simply stepped back, hands by his sides, and the room for the first time that night didn't know what to do with itself. And in that stillness, Maria finally looked up, not seeking approval, but holding her ground like someone who had known all along that the truth would eventually take its seat. Maria didn't speak again that evening, not to explain, not to defend, because everything that needed to be said had already been placed on the table, piece by piece, like quiet offerings of truth. But inside her, the weight of 12 years pressed against every breath. People in the room might have thought she stayed silent out of loyalty or obligation or even fear. But the truth was simpler and heavier. She had stayed silent out of love, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't ask to be seen, the kind that sacrifices visibility for safety. She remembered every moment she had chosen to say nothing, the birthdays where she mailed gifts without return addresses, the report cards she kept in a drawer, the nights she pressed her hand against the locket tucked inside a pillowcase, whispering promises to a child who never knew why she watched him sleep with such sadness in her eyes. There had been times she wanted to speak, when the injustice of it all burned against her chest, when family members talked about true heirs and bloodlines without knowing the boy she fed, taught, and loved had more of Charles in his spirit than any of them had ever shown. But she kept her vow, not because she was afraid, but because she knew Nathan wasn't ready. The world wasn't ready in truth. Like a child, must be protected until it can stand on its own. And now, seeing him there, in that room, surrounded by people who had once mocked her presence, she didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel victorious. She felt still, like something sacred had finally settled. He had arrived not to claim power, not to collect wealth, but to return something that should never have been taken, the dignity of being seen. And in that moment, Maria understood something only women like her understand, that silence is not weakness. Sometimes, silence is what love sounds like, when it knows the world won't understand the words. Nathan had grown up knowing how to carry questions he couldn't ask. He learned early that some forms came back incomplete, that blank spaces on school paperwork stayed blank no matter how many times the teacher circled them. He learned that other kids talked about their fathers like furniture present, solid, ordinary, while his existed only in the pauses people tried to hide when they looked at him too long. He never asked Maria directly, maybe because part of him already knew, or maybe because her silence, though gentle, was final. But the not knowing didn't protect him. It followed him, reshaped him, filled the cracks of every maybe and almost. He watched other boys inherit things, names, businesses, legacies, while he inherited only the discipline to stay quiet and the grace not to demand more. It made him strong, but it also made him lonely. And yet, when he received the letter from the lawyer, when the sealed envelope arrived with instructions and words from a man he had never truly met, he didn't open it with anger. He opened it with both hands, slowly, like something sacred. Because inside wasn't just a will. It was a whisper from a man who had finally decided to speak. Charles hadn't raised him, hadn't taught him how to tie a tie or face a crowd, but in that letter, he had said one thing Nathan had never heard from anyone else. I'm sorry, and you were never a secret to me, only to the world. That was why he came to the dinner. Not for the money, not for the name, but because Maria had carried that silence for so long that he refused to let it go unanswered. He walked into that room not to claim his place, but to return hers, to make them see her, to make her visible, because every time someone looked at him like he didn't belong, they were forgetting she did. And if standing in front of them was the only way to honor her, then he would carry every stare, every whisper, every wound just like she did. But this time, the silence would not leave with them. The silence didn't last. It never does. Not in rooms built on control and hierarchy. It began with a breath sharp, angry from Martin, the eldest son, whose entire identity had been stitched around the word first. He stood, hands flat on the table, knuckles white, and said nothing for several seconds, as if words might somehow undo the paper, the names, the voice that had shattered the illusion he thought was ironclad. But when he finally spoke, it wasn't loud. It was low, tight, almost broken. This, this isn't real, he said, eyes darting from the lawyer to Maria to Nathan. It's a setup. My father would never, but the words fell apart. Because deep down, even Martin knew that Charles had never truly entrusted him with anything that mattered. He walked away from the table without waiting for permission. Past the lawyer, past the guests, right out the doors, not like someone storming off, but like someone whose world had turned to glass and just cracked beneath his shoes. Lila, the daughter who had always played peacemaker, stayed seated, but her eyes filled, slow and quiet, like a glass left under a dripping faucet. She looked not at Nathan, but at Maria, and whispered, barely audible, I should have asked more questions. Her voice didn't carry, but her regret did. Then there was Cassandra, the red-dressed matriarch, the one who had first scoffed at Maria's presence, who had called her just the maid. She refused to stand, refused to look anyone in the eye, as if the act of acknowledgement might rewrite her version of the truth. This is manipulation, she muttered. A clever story. Nothing more. But even she didn't sound convinced. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Generations of pride had been carved into that family name, and now every corner of the table was forced to confront what pride looks like when it turns away from truth. But Nathan stood still, Maria stood still. Because they had nothing left to prove. Nathan waited until the last whisper faded, until every eye had looked away, and then slowly returned to him. Not with reverence, not with welcome, but with the wary uncertainty that comes when power shifts without warning. He didn't step up or raise his voice. He simply placed both hands behind his back and spoke with the quiet firmness of someone who knew exactly what he would and would not become. "I'm not here to remove anyone," he said. "This house, this name, they don't belong to me alone. They belong to him. And he, in his final act, chose not to punish you, but to trust me." His gaze moved across the table, pausing at no one, yet reaching everyone. "I don't want revenge. I don't want applause. I want something that carries forward, not just in blood, but in choice." Some leaned in, unsure where this was going. Others straightened, preparing for loss or gain. But then Nathan said what none of them expected. "Every asset, every holding they stay. But not for show, not for legacy galas or press releases. From this day on, everything passed to me will go toward building something my mother would be proud of. Not Maria, though she is all the mother I ever had, but the woman in that photo. The one no one ever asked about." He paused, just long enough for discomfort to rise. "Starting tonight, a foundation will be created. For children like I was. Children who were never claimed. Who grew up thinking they came from nowhere." No one interrupted. No one dared. He added, "It'll be called the Light Room. Because every child deserves at least one room where they're not a secret." Across the room, someone swallowed hard. Maria looked down at the floor, her hand resting gently over her heart. Nathan's final words were simple, but they landed heavier than anything said all night. Inheritance doesn't begin with ownership. It begins with recognition. And tonight, I recognize her. I recognize the cost she carried. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure no child has to carry that alone. And with that, he stepped back, not down, not away, just back into himself, fully seen, fully claimed, and no longer hidden by anyone's silence. 1 month later, the ballroom was different. The chandeliers still glowed. The glasses still caught the light. But the energy had changed, not louder, not grander, just clearer. This time, the gathering wasn't about inheritance. It was about illumination. At the front of the room stood a new banner, Nathan's Light Foundation. Every child, he players. Guests filed in, some familiar, some new, but the seat at the center was no longer empty. It belonged to no one person now, and yet to everyone who had once been hidden. Nathan took the stage near the end, not with fanfare, but with a single spotlight and a stillness that silenced the clinking of forks and murmurs of small talk. This foundation, he began, was built on two lives, one that was never claimed and one that never asked to be. He paused, then turned slightly to gesture toward the back of the room. There, in the final row, stood Maria, still in black, still not on the stage, still herself. She hadn't wanted recognition. She hadn't asked to speak. But the moment Nathan pointed, the entire room turned and rose. No music, no applause, just the sound of chairs pushing back in quiet honor. Maria didn't wave. She didn't cry. She just bowed her head, one hand over her chest, as if to press down the years still beating beneath her uniform. Behind Nathan, the screen lit up with a single black and white image, Charles holding a baby in his arms, a photo no one remembered being taken. A moment captured not for legacy, but for love. In the corner of the frame, almost faded, Maria's hands adjusting the child's blanket. No face, just hands. And beneath the image, a simple caption, "She never asked for a seat. She gave someone else one." The lights dimmed. The crowd remained standing. And somewhere in that quiet, a new kind of legacy began, one not built on marble or money, but on moments no one saw until someone chose to name them. If you've ever carried a truth in silence, waiting for the world to catch up, then this story is yours. 2. Leave a comment, share what you've carried, and subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where the quiet ones are never forgotten.